The howling wind drowned out Nora Mitchell's desperate prayers as she clutched her 6-year-old son closer to her chest. Their thin blanket doing little against the relentless Nevada winter. They had been stranded for hours since their stagecoach overturned, the driver and other passengers continuing on foot to the nearest town while Nora stayed behind with Samuel, his fever too high for the treacherous journey through the growing blizzard. "Mama, I'm cold," Samuel whimpered, his small body trembling against hers. The abandoned stagecoach offered minimal protection from the biting wind as snow accumulated around them, erasing the trail others had taken. "I know, sweetheart," Nora whispered, adjusting the woolen cap on his head. "Help will come. We just need to stay awake." She checked Samuel's forehead again, her heart sinking at the heat radiating from his skin. The journey to visit her sister in Carson City had seemed straightforward when they departed from their failed homestead in Utah 3 days prior. Now, with night falling and the temperature dropping, Nora feared they wouldn't survive until morning. The crunch of snow beneath horse hooves nearly escaped her notice. Struggling to her feet, Nora peered through the swirling white, catching sight of a dark silhouette approaching through the storm. "A rider. Hello," she called, her voice breaking as she waved frantically. "Please help us." The horse slowed, and its rider, a broad-shouldered man in a heavy coat and worn Stetson, dismounted with practiced ease. He approached cautiously, one hand near the revolver at his hip. "Madam." "You all right?" His voice carried even through the howling wind, deep and steady. "Our stagecoach overturned," Nora explained quickly, gesturing to the damaged vehicle. "My son is sick with fever. The others continued to the nearest town, but Samuel couldn't make the journey." The stranger glanced at the half-buried stagecoach before kneeling to examine the boy. "How long you been out here?" "Hours. Since midday." He nodded grimly, scanning the worsening conditions. "Nearest town's Belmont, still 10 miles north. They won't make it back for you tonight, not in this." He removed a glove and touched Samuel's forehead, frowning. "This fever needs tending. My cabin's about 3 miles east. It's your best chance." Relief flooded Nora's body, making her knees weak. "Thank you. Oh, thank you, sir." "Name's Vincent Zale," he said, scooping Samuel into his arms with surprising gentleness for such a rugged man. "Most folks call me Vince." "Nora Mitchell. This is my son, Samuel." Vince lifted Samuel onto his horse first, then helped Nora up behind him. "Hold tight to the boy. I'll lead us on foot." Nora clutched Samuel against her chest as Vince guided the horse through deepening snow. The wind cut through her threadbare coat, but compared to their previous predicament, it felt like salvation. She studied her rescuer, through the falling snow, tall and solidly built, with a weathered face that spoke of years under harsh sun. Despite his intimidating appearance, the tenderness with which he'd handled Samuel revealed something else entirely. The journey seemed endless, but eventually a small log cabin emerged from the white landscape, smoke curling from its chimney. A barn stood nearby, its door battling against the wind. "Almost there," Vince called over his shoulder. He led them to the barn first, quickly stabling his horse before guiding Nora, still carrying Samuel, to the cabin. The warmth inside hit Nora like a physical force. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, illuminating a modest but tidy single room with a bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, and a cooking area. "Set him here," Vince instructed, clearing space on the bed. "Those clothes are soaked through. Need to get you both dry." Nora hesitated only briefly before practical necessity overcame propriety. She helped Samuel out of his wet clothing while Vince rummaged through a trunk, producing a flannel shirt that swallowed the boy's small frame. "Got some broth warming," Vince said, moving to the wood stove where a pot simmered. "And willowbark tea for his fever." Nora looked up in surprise. "You're knowledgeable about treating illness." A shadow crossed his face. "Picked up a few things. War taught some hard lessons." He didn't elaborate further, instead pouring the tea into a cup. "Let it cool a bit first. Madam, you need to change too. Can't help the boy if you catch death yourself." He retrieved a clean shirt and trousers, turning his back respectfully as Nora changed behind a blanket he'd hung for privacy. The clothes were enormous on her slender frame, but they were warm and dry. "Thank you," she said, emerging from behind the makeshift screen. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found us." Vince merely nodded, handing her a steaming bowl. "Eat, then we'll tend to the boy proper." Throughout the night, they worked together to bring Samuel's fever down, applying cool compresses and coaxing him to drink the bitter tea. Vince proved surprisingly gentle, his large hands deftly wringing out cloths and adjusting blankets with the skill of someone accustomed to caring for others. Near dawn, Samuel's fever broke. Nora, exhausted beyond measure, sagged with relief as her son fell into a natural sleep, his breathing even and deep. "You should rest," Vince said quietly, moving to bank the fire. "Storm's still raging. You're safe here until it passes." Nora wanted to protest, to offer help with the morning chores she could hear him preparing for, but fatigue won out. She curled beside Samuel on the bed, falling asleep to the sound of Vince moving quietly about the cabin. When she woke hours later, the cabin was empty save for Samuel, still sleeping soundly. A note on the table, written in surprisingly neat penmanship, indicated Vince had gone to tend the animals. Nora took the opportunity to properly examine her surroundings. The cabin was simple but well-maintained. Books lined a small shelf, surprising for a man she'd assumed might be unlettered. Medical texts sat alongside volumes of poetry and history. A carved wooden horse stood on the mantel, the craftsmanship exquisite in its detail. The door opened, bringing a blast of cold air as Vince stomped snow from his boots. "Storm's letting up," he announced, carrying an armload of firewood. "But trails won't be passable for a couple days yet." Nora's stomach tightened. "We're imposing on your hospitality." No imposition," he interrupted, stacking the wood. "Wouldn't put anyone out in this, let alone a woman and child." He glanced at Samuel. "How's he faring?" "Better. Thank you for your help with the fever." Vince nodded, seeming uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Hungry, got venison stew." Over the simple meal, Nora learned that Vince had been a rancher before the war, returning afterward to find his property claimed by others. Rather than fight, he'd retreated to this remote cabin where he trapped, hunted, and occasionally guided travelers through the mountain passes. "And you, madam, what brings you through these parts with a young'un in winter?" Nora stared into her stew. "My husband died last spring. Cholera. We had a small homestead in Utah, but I couldn't manage it alone." The familiar pain washed through her, though duller now after months of practical survival concerns. "My sister married well in Carson City. She's offered us a home until I can find suitable work." Vince listened without interruption, his expression giving away nothing. When she finished, he simply nodded. "Hard country for a woman alone." "The world is hard for a woman alone," Nora replied with unexpected sharpness. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Reckon that's true enough." Samuel woke later that afternoon, weak but alert. His delight at finding himself in a real mountain man's cabin seemed to amuse Vince, who answered the boy's endless questions about hunting and trapping with unexpected patience. "You hunt bears?" Samuel asked, eyes wide as he sipped broth at the table. "When necessary. Better to leave them be when possible." "My pa shot a bear once," Samuel declared proudly. "Said it was big as a house." "Samuel," Nora admonished gently, "remember what we discussed about exaggeration?" Vince chuckled, the sound warming the cabin more than the fire. "Memories tend to grow things larger, especially bears." He rose from the table. "Got something you might like to see." He retrieved a wooden box from beneath his bed, opening it to reveal an assortment of carved animals: bears, deer, wolves, and birds, each rendered in surprising detail. Samuel gasped in delight. "Did you make these?" Vince nodded, allowing the boy to examine each piece. "Keeps the hands busy during long winter nights." "They're beautiful," Nora said honestly, admiring the fluid lines of a leaping deer. "You have genuine talent, Mr. Zale. Just Vince, madam." Then I'm just Nora. Their eyes met briefly over Samuel's bent head, and something shifted in the atmosphere between them, a moment of recognition, perhaps, or understanding. The next morning brought clear skies but deep snow. Vince spent the morning clearing paths to the barn and chopping more firewood, while Nora insisted on cooking and tidying the cabin. Samuel, still recovering, sat wrapped in blankets near the fire. Working diligently on a wooden figure Vince had started teaching him to carve. "Not too deep with that knife," Nora cautioned, watching nervously. "He's doing fine," Vince assured her, stomping snow from his boots as he entered. "Boy's got a steady hand." Samuel beamed at the praise, focusing with renewed concentration on the small piece of pine taking shape under his careful strokes. That evening, as Samuel slept, Nora and Vince sat before the fire sharing a pot of coffee. "Why do you live so far from town?" Nora asked, curiosity finally overcoming her natural reserve. Vince stared into the flames. "Found I couldn't abide crowds after the war, too much noise, too many eyes." He took a slow sip of coffee. "Out here, a man answers only to himself and nature." "Sounds lonely." "Peaceful," he corrected. "Different thing entirely." Nora studied his profile, strong and weathered in the firelight. "What about family?" "Parents gone before the war, no siblings, had a wife once." His voice grew distant. "Eleanor, fever took her while I was fighting at Antietam." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "My Thomas died quickly, at least. There's mercy in that." Vince nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Folk who haven't lost someone don't understand that sometimes the how of dying matters as much as the dying itself." "Yes," Nora whispered, surprised by his insight. "That's exactly it." The following day, Vince announced he needed to check his trap lines. "Won't be gone more than a few hours. Rifle's loaded if you need it, though shouldn't be any trouble." After he left, Nora busied herself with thoroughly cleaning the cabin, grateful for practical tasks to occupy her mind. Samuel, stronger now, helped sort Vince's herbs and medicines under Nora's supervision. "I like Mr. Vince," Samuel declared as they worked. "He doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby." Nora smiled, remembering how Vince had explained the properties of each herb with serious respect for Samuel's intelligence. "He's a kind man." "Could we stay here instead of going to Aunt Martha's?" Samuel asked hopefully. "Samuel," Nora chided gently, "Mr. Zale has his own life. We can't impose further once the snow clears. But he lives alone, and you said we have to find work. Maybe he needs help." Nora shook her head, ignoring the unexpected appeal of the idea. "Hush now, it's not our place to presume." When Vince returned, he brought rabbit for their dinner. Samuel watched with fascination as he prepared the meat, asking endless questions about hunting that Vince answered with surprising patience. That night, unable to sleep, Nora found Vince still awake, whittling by the fire. He'd insisted on taking the floor, giving his bed to her and Samuel. "May I join you?" she asked softly. He nodded, setting aside his carving. They sat in companionable silence until Nora gathered her courage. "I want to thank you properly for saving our lives," she began. "No need for thanks." "There is every need," she insisted. "We would have died in that snow if not for your kindness. I have little to offer in return, but I'm a hard worker. If there are tasks needing attention before we depart, you've done plenty already," Vince interrupted, gesturing to the now spotless cabin. "Place hasn't been this clean since it was built," Nora smiled. "A poor repayment for our lives." Vince studied her face in the firelight. "Why were you traveling alone? No relatives to escort you?" "None who could spare the time or expense," Nora admitted. "Thomas's family never approved of me. I was the daughter of a schoolteacher, no land, no dowry. They considered me beneath him." "Their loss," Vince said simply. The words, spoken without pretense or flattery, warmed Nora more than the fire before them. "You're an unusual man, Vince Zale. Just straightforward is all." In the following days, a routine developed. Vince taught Samuel simple wilderness skills: how to identify animal tracks, which plants were safe to eat, how to predict weather changes. Nora cooked and mended Vince's worn clothing, discovering tears and holes that had long gone unrepaired. "You've a gift for cooking," Vince commented one evening over a stew Nora had prepared using dried vegetables and venison from his stores. "Been eating my own cooking too long to remember food could taste this good." Nora felt herself flush with pleasure at the simple compliment. "It's easy to cook well with good ingredients. You keep a well-stocked larder for a bachelor." "Learned the hard way that winter comes harsh in these mountains," he replied. "First year I nearly starved before spring." As they cleared dishes together, a task Vince had never allowed a guest to help with before their hands brushed. Nora felt a jolt of awareness, followed immediately by guilt. Thomas had been dead less than a year. Was it disloyal to notice another man's hands, his kindness, the way firelight caught in his beard? She withdrew quickly, but not before Vince noticed her reaction. He stepped back, giving her space with that instinctive consideration that continued to surprise her. "Snow's melting fast," he observed, changing the subject. "Another day or two, trail to Belmont should be passable. Can arrange transport to Carson City from there." "Yes, of course," Nora agreed, ignoring the unexpected pang of disappointment. "We've imposed far too long already." Later that night, Samuel's cough returned with alarming force. Nora woke to find him struggling for breath, his earlier recovery seemingly vanished. "Vince," she called urgently, forgetting propriety in her fear. He was beside the bed in an instant, checking Samuel's pulse and listening to his chest. "Congestion's back, worse than before. Lung infection likely set in." "What can we do?" Nora asked, fighting panic. "Steam helps. And I've herbs that might ease it." He moved with swift efficiency, hanging a kettle over the fire and retrieving various plants from his stores. Used to treat pneumonia cases during the war when medicines ran short. Throughout the night, they worked together, creating steam tents with blankets, applying mustard plasters to Samuel's chest, and coaxing him to drink medicinal teas. By dawn, his breathing had eased slightly, though his fever remained. "You should rest," Vince told Nora as morning light filtered through the windows. "I'll watch him." "I couldn't possibly sleep now," she protested. "You'll be no good to him exhausted," Vince countered gently. "I promise I'll wake you if there's any change." Too tired to argue further, Nora stretched out on Vince's bedroll near the fire. Despite her anxiety, exhaustion claimed her quickly. She woke hours later to find Samuel propped up on pillows, sipping broth while Vince told him a story about tracking a mountain lion. "Mama." Samuel called, his voice weak but his eyes brighter. "Mr. Vince says I got the strongest lungs he's ever heard for coughing." Relief flooded Nora as she hurried to touch her son's forehead. The fever had reduced considerably. "How do you feel, sweetheart?" "Tired." "But Mr. Vince's soup is good. Not as good as yours, though," he added loyally. Vince chuckled. "Boy's diplomatic. Gets that from his mother, I'd wager." Nora met his eyes, seeing the fatigue there. He'd clearly not slept at all. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, understanding all she couldn't say aloud. Samuel's recovery progressed steadily, but slowly over the next several days. The delay gave Nora time to consider their situation with increasing clarity. Her sister's home in Carson City had always been a solution born of desperation, rather than desire. Martha's letters, while offering shelter, had contained undercurrents of reluctance, concerns about space, her husband's reaction, whether Samuel would disturb their childless household. One afternoon, while Samuel napped and Vince repaired a broken trap on the cabin porch, Nora joined him outside. The air was crisp but mild, the snow melting rapidly in the strengthening spring sunshine. "May I ask you something?" she ventured after watching him work for several minutes. "Course." "You mentioned needing to visit Belmont for supplies soon. Would it be possible for me to accompany you? I should send word to my sister about our delay." Vince considered this, hands still working the metal trap components. "Trail's muddy but passable now." "Could make the trip tomorrow if Samuel's well enough to leave. He's much improved," Nora said, "and I think—" She hesitated, gathering courage. I think perhaps I should explore other possibilities besides Carson City. Vince's hands stilled. What sort of possibilities? Belmont might need a teacher or a seamstress. I'm skilled at both. She smoothed her borrowed skirt nervously. The journey has shown me that Samuel thrives in open spaces. My sister's home is small in the crowded part of town. Belmont's a rough mining town, Vince warned. Not always suitable for a woman alone. I wouldn't be entirely alone. I'd have Samuel. She met his gaze steadily. And perhaps a friend if you were amenable. Something shifted in Vince's expression, surprise, followed by careful consideration. You'd be giving up security. Your sister's husband has means, I gather. Security without happiness is its own kind of prison, Nora replied softly. I've lived that life before, trying to please Thomas's family while being constantly reminded of my inadequacies. I won't subject Samuel to the same. Vince nodded slowly. Town's got no proper school. Talked about hiring a teacher last year, but nothing came of it. Plenty of children running wild whose parents would pay for education. Hope bloomed in Nora's chest. Truly, mining camp's rough, but families are settling. Civilization follows women and children. Always does. He returned to his work, though his movements seemed less focused. Could introduce you to some folk who might help, if you're certain. I am, Nora said firmly. More certain than I've been about anything in a long while. The trip to Belmont the following day revealed a town in transition, part rough mining camp, part emerging community. Wooden buildings lined a muddy main street, with construction underway on several more substantial structures. Men outnumbered women significantly, but Nora noted several families among the bustling activity. Vince was greeted with respect, if not warmth, as he guided Nora through town. They visited the general store first, where Nora posted a letter to her sister explaining their change in plans. Mrs. Abernathy runs the boarding house, Vince explained as they continued down the street. Decent woman. Might have information about teaching positions. The boarding house proved to be one of the more well-maintained buildings, with actual glass windows and a swept porch. Mrs. Abernathy, a formidable widow in her 50s, welcomed them into her front parlor. Vincent Zale, as I live and breathe, she exclaimed. Haven't seen you in town since autumn. Mrs. Abernathy, he nodded respectfully. This is Mrs. Mitchell and her son Samuel. They were stranded in the blizzard last week. Mrs. Mitchell is considering settling in Belmont. She's a trained teacher. The older woman's eyes lit with interest. A teacher? Well now, that's providential timing. The town council voted funds for a school just last month. Building's nearly finished, but they've had no luck attracting a qualified instructor. Hope surged through Nora. I taught for 3 years before my marriage, and I've been teaching my son since he was old enough to hold a slate. Can you handle rough mining children? Some haven't had much discipline, Mrs. Abernathy warned. My father taught in frontier settlements my entire childhood, Nora replied confidently. I'm well acquainted with the challenges. Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. I'll arrange a meeting with the council chairman tomorrow. Meanwhile, I've rooms available if you need lodging. Vince shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Mitchell and her son will continue staying at my cabin until matters are settled. Samuel's still recovering from illness. The older woman's eyebrows rose slightly, but she made no comment beyond, as you see fit. Though you're welcome anytime, Mrs. Mitchell, should you need more suitable accommodations. The implication hung in the air, bringing color to Nora's cheeks. Thank you for your concern, but Mr. Zale has been a perfect gentleman. He saved our lives. Outside again, Nora noticed Vince's tense posture. I've damaged your reputation, she realized aloud. I didn't consider how it would appear. My reputation's my own concern, he replied gruffly. More worried about yours. People will always talk, Nora sighed. In Utah, they gossiped because I taught Samuel to read Greek. With Thomas's family, it was because I wore my dresses too plainly. There's no escaping judgment. A hint of a smile touched Vince's lips. Greek, eh? Impressive. My father believed girls deserved education equal to boys, not a popular position, but one I'm grateful for now. She glanced at the muddy street, bustling with miners and merchants. Do you truly think I could build a life here? Town needs civilizing influences. A good teacher would be valued. He hesitated before adding, and I'd be nearby, if you ever needed assistance. The simple offer contained layers of meaning Nora wasn't ready to examine fully. Instead, she nodded gratefully. That means more than I can express. The following weeks brought rapid changes. The town council eagerly hired Nora as Belmont's first schoolteacher, offering a small but adequate salary plus living quarters in the newly constructed schoolhouse. Samuel's health improved steadily in the mountain air, and he quickly made friends among the local children who were delighted at the prospect of formal education. Throughout this transition, Vince remained a steady presence. Though he maintained his distance from town life, he visited regularly, bringing game for Nora's table and continuing Samuel's wilderness education on weekend excursions. He helped repair the schoolhouse roof before Nora and Samuel moved in, and built sturdy desks for the students using lumber donated by the mining company. Spring advanced into early summer, bringing wildflowers to the mountain meadows and more families to the growing town. Nora's school flourished, with 27 students ranging from 5 to 16 attending daily lessons. Even a few adults miners eager to learn reading and mathematics began attending evening classes twice weekly. On a warm Saturday in June, Vince arrived at the schoolhouse with his wagon. Thought the boy might enjoy fishing at the high lake, he suggested, if you're amenable to joining us. Samuel's enthusiastic response made Nora laugh. I suppose that settles it. Let me pack some lunch. The mountain lake, nestled in a high valley surrounded by pines, was breathtakingly beautiful. While Samuel attempted to catch trout under Vince's patient guidance, Nora spread a blanket on the shore, enjoying the rare opportunity for leisure. He's looking strong, Vince commented as Samuel successfully landed a small fish, his excited shouts echoing across the water. Thanks to you, Nora replied. I've never seen him so happy and healthy. That's your doing. You made a brave choice, starting fresh in Belmont. Nora studied Vince's profile, noting how he'd trimmed his beard and hair before this outing. I had help, still do. He met her gaze, and the emotion there made her breath catch. Nora, I'm not one for fancy words, never have been, but these past months. He cleared his throat. Having you and Samuel nearby has reminded me of things I thought I'd put behind me. What things? She asked softly, wanting a home that's more than just shelter, wanting to be part of something. He glanced towards Samuel, who was attempting to bait his hook again. I know it's soon after your loss, and I'm not a wealthy man, got nothing but my cabin and some trapping lines, but if you ever thought you might consider— Yes, Nora interrupted, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Whatever you're asking, yes. Vince looked startled, then cautiously hopeful. You don't even know what I'm proposing. I believe I do. Nora's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. You're proposing a partnership, a future together, if I'm not mistaken. That's exactly it, he confirmed, relief evident in his expression. Not right away. We could court properly first, give Samuel time to adjust to the idea. Samuel adores you already, Nora said softly. He asks daily when you'll visit next. They were interrupted by Samuel's return, proudly carrying 2 small trout. Mr. Vince, I caught dinner. Fine work, Vince praised, ruffling the boy's hair. Your mother and I were just discussing something important, something that might affect you two. Samuel looked between them curiously. What is it? Nora nodded encouragingly to Vince, who knelt to meet Samuel at eye level. I was asking your mother if she might consider letting me court her. Do you know what that means? Samuel's face scrunched in concentration. Like when Mr. Jenkins brings flowers to Miss Harriet at the mercantile. Something like that, Vince agreed with a small smile. It means I care for your mother and would like to spend more time with both of you. Eventually, if everyone agrees, it could mean becoming a family together. Samuel considered this seriously. Would we live in your cabin? It has better fishing than town. Samuel, Nora admonished gently, though she couldn't help smiling at his practical concern. It's a fair question, Vince said. We'd need to discuss all the possibilities. Your mother's teaching is important to the town. You could build a cabin closer to town, Samuel suggested with a child's straightforward logic. Then Mama could still teach, and we could still fish. Vince looked at Nora, eyebrows raised in amusement. The boy makes a compelling argument. That evening, as they returned to town with their catch, Nora felt a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced since before Thomas's death. The grief would always remain part of her, but it no longer defined her future. I never expected this, she confessed as Vince helped her down from the wagon. When our stagecoach overturned, I thought it was the end of our hopes. Instead, it was a beginning. Life has strange trails, Vince agreed, his hand lingering on hers. I went hunting that day and found something I never knew I was searching for. Over the following months, their courtship progressed with the steady assurance of people who had already weathered life's harshest storms. Vince began construction on a new cabin at the edge of town, close enough for Nora to continue teaching while still maintaining the connection to nature that had healed both Vince and Samuel. By Christmas, with snow once again blanketing the mountains around Belmont, they married in the schoolhouse, decorated with pine boughs and candles by Nora's students. Samuel stood proudly beside them, holding the rings Vince had carefully crafted from silver mined in the nearby hills. That night, after Samuel had fallen asleep in his new bedroom in their completed cabin, Nora and Vince stood before the hearth, watching flames dance over the logs. A year ago, I never could have imagined this, Nora said, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. Nor I, Vince admitted, his arm tightening around her waist. Was resigned to solitude, thought it was my natural state, and now I know better. He turned her to face him, his expression serious. That blizzard nearly took you and Samuel from this world before I ever knew you existed. Makes a man realize how fragile life is, how precious. Yet how resilient, Nora added, reaching up to touch his face. We survived, found each other, built something new from the remnants of our old lives. As snow fell outside their window, insulating them from the world beyond, they embraced the warmth they had found in each other, a warmth that had begun in the darkest cold of winter, when a woman and child stranded in snow had been found by a solitary cowboy who brought them not just to his cabin, but ultimately home. Years later, when their family had grown to include twin boys born the following winter, Nora would still marvel at how close they had come to passing like ships in the night, how easily Vince might have taken a different hunting trail that snowy day. How she and Samuel might have perished within miles of the man who would become their salvation and their future. Sometimes the cruelest storms, she reflected, brought the greatest blessings if one could endure long enough to see the clearing skies.